Welcome to Spot Check, the weekly video update series for The Greatest Unreality, a dissertation about Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Nick Miser. I am coming at you today from the Texas A&M University campus. I got stuck here doing some administrative things, and so we're filming the video here instead of at my house. There's not much new to report. I continue to plug along on transcriptions. You will notice if you are at the $25 or above level, the PDFs for Habitition are now available, and the add-on rewards are also being processed. If you have not received an email from me, it means that everything is set for your add-on reward and we're moving forward on it. I also can announce now that my next two trips are going to be in January to Denton, Texas, which is a town near Dallas, and in February I'll be traveling up to Seattle, which I think most of you are familiar with as being located in Washington. So this week, what I'm going to do is I'd like to take an excerpt from the interview I'm currently working through and provide a little bit of reflection on one of the things that we talked about. This interview is with one of the Glantry players named James. James is actually the founder of the New York Redbox Group, and we met to talk at Artichoke Pizza, which happens to be his favorite pizza place in Manhattan. And we talked about a lot of different things, but I'd like to focus on James's response to a question I asked him about the problems that people have talked about of latent racism and sexism in gaming. And James kind of threw me a curveball in his response, and I really have had a good time thinking through the implications of his response. So James acknowledged that there can be problems in this area in gaming, but he directed me to a broader context in which to think about these things. So I'll be posting the transcribed excerpt along with the entire transcript, but the smaller portion so that you can see just this portion in James's words. But my understanding of what he had to say is this. So D&D is in part a game about violence. Good violence, bad violence, and maybe about the difference between those two things. Now, violence is a major theme in many stories the world over, going back for as long as we have record of stories. In imagining good violence, one of the things that we tend to do is tell ourselves that we are the good guys. We're using violence against ogres, or as James says, those, quote, sons of bitches over there. So according to James, this is a part of the human condition, the idea that those people, whoever that might be, are the bad guys. In anthropology, we actually talk about this a lot, and we talk about it in terms of the other, often with a capital O and maybe some quotation marks thrown up for good measure. You can also think of Lost, if you've seen that show, where the others are those scary people on the other side of the island. And so the other is a category that's actually kind of logically prior to actually applying it to any particular people. And some people have actually argued that this idea of the other, or we'll talk about alterity as another way of talking about that, or the Newman, which is just another word that means other, is also actually really tied up in our ideas about the divine and the sacred. So it's a central concept for humans to deal with, and is then sometimes applied to people in ways that have negative effects. So with this as the background, James argues that the most important and unique thing about gaming, or at least one of the most important things about gaming, is that it calls on us to imagine ourselves as someone different from who we are, sometimes very radically different, and often in situations that are very different from anything that we experience. According to James, this, quote, trains our muscles in that area and allows us to achieve empathy in better ways with others in our everyday lives. So as evidence of this in his own life, James talks about his experiences as a criminal defense lawyer, which is something that he's done in the past. And in many of the cases he worked, the client was clearly guilty of the crime in question, and there was so much evidence piled up that the purpose wasn't to bring to trial. It was clearly going to be a plea bargain where the client was pleading guilty. And James's job was to write a description of the case and the situation to the judge who would be determining sentencing. And these judges were usually upper class, middle-aged white men, went to Ivy League schools, kind of the person you would expect for a federal judge. And so this is someone who's in circumstances about as far removed from those of the accused individual as possible. And so James found himself drawing on the skills he developed in gaming as he first tried to understand the client's life story. and imagine himself in that situation and circumstances, and share that with the judge, whose position he also had to imagine. In some ways, very similar to a dungeon master who's trying to run a variety of different NPCs and understand what it would be like to be that character and what decisions they might make. And as he describes it, and I'll quote a portion from the transcript here, he says, "If I were my client as a kid, growing up in these circumstances, why would I make these terrible decisions, right? Because there's no question he made these decisions. There's no excuse for what this person did, except the fact that who's to say that you would have done differently? Who's to say that on a bad day you wouldn't have made the same bad decision that this guy did? If you were under this kind of stress, and look, judge, you gotta punish him. He did wrong. But judge, understand him first." So because of the way that gaming develops this ability to take the role of the other, according to James, all gaming in a certain sense is subversive in the way that it circumvents that likelihood that we're going to put an actual person into the category of the other, because we're able to connect with and imagine ourselves in very different positions and recognize that they are people occupying their own subject position as well. And so I'd be curious to hear all of your responses to this, if this matches your experiences of gaming. James does acknowledge, and I would agree with him, that there's a range of this. Some people are developing empathy and more focused on that, taking the role of the other as they game, than some others who might not be as interested in that side of gaming. But to what extent does this match your own experiences? Is this something that resounds true with you, or are there things that you would disagree with in at least my presentation of what James had to say here? And I'm going to keep working through transcripts and have something more to talk to you about next week. I'll see you then.